During the recent war in Ethiopia's Tigray region, Fiore fled the country and moved to Kenya. She thought she was leaving behind the trauma she had witnessed firsthand. In Nairobi, she got a job working as a content moderator for Facebook, not knowing what she'd signed up for. Watching shocking videos, day in, day out, there was no escaping the trauma.
All you see is slaughter, dismembered bodies, people being burned alive. And once you see it, you can't unsee it, especially for those of us who have relatives in Tigray, where the war was happening. Watching your people doing those things to each other is shocking.
Even though the pay was only $2 per hour, she didn't quit. She needed the money to survive and felt trapped. Sama is Facebook's outsourcing company that employed her. They sometimes offered so-called wellness time, 20 minutes with a counsellor, but it was no help as she wasn't allowed to talk about what she'd seen.
I'm afraid I became desensitized. I don't react to seeing blood or dismembered bodies because I saw it for hours every day. I don't feel like I'm part of normal society anymore.
In the past, Facebook has been accused of not doing enough to prevent the spread of incitement to violence in Ethiopia. Fiore says that's because only around 20 people worked on the content on the war in Tigray. Far too small a team to effectively block harmful and inciting content. Her colleague Awat says they only had 55 seconds to review each video. If you were too slow or made mistakes, you were at risk of being fired.
I've already been abused and exploited. I expect from Mark Zuckerberg that if he didn't know, he should understand what type of work this is. He needs to know that and deal with it.
Awat says his work changed him from being outgoing to being reclusive and paranoid. Watching up to 3,500 graphic videos per week would break anyone, he says. This January, Sama sacked 260 content moderators, including Awat and Fiore, citing the economic climate. But coming so soon after another content moderator sued Facebook over mental health issues, many ex-Sama employees say it looks like Facebook is trying to shed its responsibility to its workforce. They feel Facebook treated them as if they were disposable.
Now, we did ask Sama and Facebook for comment, but did not get a reply. Let's speak now to Nanjira Sambuli from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. She joins us from Nairobi. She's a researcher and expert on all things tech policy, so I think the right person to talk to right now. Welcome to DW News Africa, Nigeria. Now, this Meta case is still in court, so we won't delve into the details specifically, but looking overall at the growth of tech companies looking for cheap labor in Africa, are we at the risk of seeing exploitation, seeing the growth of digital sweatshops in Africa?
Thanks for that question, Tommy. Indeed, there is a huge risk of that, simply because there aren't sufficient guardrails in effect that regulate how this labor is tapped into. So what has been registering, I think, globally is that Africa is emerging as a market that has a young, energetic workforce that can take on any job that will make a difference. And sometimes many of them are even below minimum wage, but above anything that they didn't have. So the compared to nothing sort of metric then allows a lot of room for data exploitation of labor, something that does need labor laws in every country to focus on the digital economy, or the gig economy as it's called.
Many African countries are betting on a digital economy to provide jobs for their people. Unemployment is a major issue. So we see them looking at this, particularly from a business side of things. But how prepared are they to adequately regulate this emerging digital workforce?
Yeah, this is a very good and salient question, one that should be informing a lot of debate in many countries. I think often we're given this false dichotomy that, something is better than nothing. Some jobs, however precarious, are better than no jobs. Yet the truth is that we can do both things. We can ensure that there are viable regulatory mechanisms in motion to protect the rights of workers, in as much as we are, in a sense, desperate for these jobs to be brought to our corners. And I think what we're also seeing is that, because it's young people and, a lot of public policy stances in many African countries is there aren't formal jobs, go into the gig economy or go into the digital realm and make it on your own in entrepreneurship. We've sort of seen a posture of leaving people to the wilderness. Yet we do have in many countries existing labor laws, many that are also being revised even in the International Labour Organization to talk about how they adapted to the digital age. We need that to continue being advocated for in local communities because we don't need to be setting people off to be exploited when there could be better ways to actually ensure that we get the best of both aspects.
And on a related note, in the West, there is a lot of talk about, securing of data protection. The EU has the law protecting people from being exploited. We see, things like the GDPR. How about African countries? Any progress in that regard?
Yes, we have seen a lot of movement in African countries. I think approximately 20 or so in a position where they either have a law in effect or in near effect around data protection. Many of them mirror the GDPR, and that's a very interesting sort of normative superpower element to the European Union's regulations. A lot of it is also driven by the fact that a lot of these GDPR or data protection requirements are part of the conditions for trading with EU countries. So that has caused a lot of movement. The missing link now and the continuing one to explore is how those rights now enshrined in law are also put in effect in the local ecosystem. In Kenya, for example, the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, I think, has been in effect since 2019 and is now trying to see how, over and above how, Kenya trade to the EU, how those laws apply to the Kenyan ecosystem, and that's been an interesting movement to note. So hopefully we can start seeing that a lot more in a number of other African countries to stem the sort of abuse or misuse of our being online or our data as we generate, as we engage online and through our devices.
And that takes us to another issue, which is artificial intelligence. That is the talk of the town at the moment. We're seeing the rise of all these platforms, these apps. We have DALL-E, we have ChatGPT and all. Where do African countries stand in terms of addressing the issue, or are they still playing catch-up?
I suppose we're still playing catch-up, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And, there's an advantage of seeing how different countries and other jurisdictions respond to this. So, for example, seeing Italy sort of place a temporary ban on the use of ChatGPT will have interesting implications insofar as what are lessons to be learned from what we need to do insofar as the kinds of regulations or guardrails we put in place through legal instruments in different countries. All too often, the rush to regulate or legislate ends up with stringent postures that end up even hurting and harming the local economy more than protecting as is desired. So in this case, I think we've seen a lot more of sort of nonchalance with even African users with ChatGPT, DALL-E, and others. The fact that, not too many people will be using it also creates a different sort of layer of complexity insofar as how African countries go about it, given the fact that we're still in the early stages of connecting everyone to this digital economy. So I think African countries and other regions of the world that are still in the early stages of digital economies can take on a wait-and-see approach and offer more guidelines to their citizens and to their businesses, rather than just coming down with a heavy hand of legislation that restricts. And India is an instructive example where they've opted, rather than banning certain artificial intelligence tools, to take on a more proactive stance as the government, as regulators and legislators, on how they can provide guidelines that help grow their own AI economy. So there's something there to be learned for African countries as well.